Not every enemy is outside the door. Sometimes he lives right inside the house. While Thomas risked his life serving in Iraq, the biggest betrayal of his life was being woven quietly in his own home, and it involved the two people he trusted the most, his son and his wife. This wasn't just some fling. It was a moral collapse so unimaginable that no one would dare face it. And when the truth came out, there was no turning back. This isn't just a story about infidelity. It's a raw lesson on human fragility, broken loyalty, and what happens when we ignore the signs our heart tries to hide. What you're about to see goes beyond gossip. It's a survival guide for your soul. A story that starts with a home, passes through a war, and ends with a wound no battlefield could ever inflict. And if you think this could never happen to you, you'd better watch until the end. In a small American Midwestern town where time seems to move slower and everyone knows everyone, lived Thomas, a war veteran bearing scars that don't show up in pictures. He was the kind of man who didn't demand respect. He earned it. After years spent trying to piece together the broken shards left by a painful divorce, he finally found solace in Lisa's arms, a younger woman with a charm that blended lightheartedness and savvy. They married after a whirlwind romance, and before long, she became Ryan's stepmother, his father's son. It was a new family finding its rhythm, but some melodies fall out of tune before the music even starts. Ryan was your typical young adult, torn between the demands knocking at his door and temptations lurking down the street. Though he never called Lisa Mom, he got along with her just fine. There was a rehearsed courtesy between them, something that looked like harmony, but anyone paying close attention could detect the unspoken tension. Thomas, with that proud soldier demeanor carried over from witnessing humanity's worst in combat, thought he was finally in charge of his own story. Little did he know that sometimes the real enemy isn't in the battlefield, but on the sofa in his living room. They lived in a typical house with a bright facade and well-kept lawn, but behind every wall lay secrets deeper than anyone could imagine. Thomas trusted blindly. He believed love was enough and distance would be filled with maturity and respect. The reality is prolonged absence never remains neutral. It either binds you closer or tears you apart. And it was in that vacuum that reality began to warp. If Thomas had known what lay ahead in the months to come, maybe he would have met his wife and son's eyes with a trace more suspicion before leaving. Heading back to Iraq once again felt like flipping a switch between personal life and survival mode. Before he left, Thomas hugged Lisa tight and clasped Ryan's shoulder with that paternal firmness that quietly says, "Take care of the house as if it's your own." They promised to look after each other. Promises sealed with held-back tears and a kiss on the driveway gate, the very scene played out in hundreds of American homes when a soldier departs to serve. But no one ever mentions that the war on the home front can claim casualties, even when there are no bombs or bunkers. Meanwhile, Lisa embraced her role as the lonely wife to perfection. She glided through the halls in silk nightgowns and tended to the garden as though each bloom was an extension of the flawless image she aimed to project. Ryan came home from college, head full of theories and heart full of questions. It's curious how empty space can pull two people closer when they ought to stay apart. There was no warning, only that kind of quiet that settles in when morality begins to slip away slowly, almost imperceptibly, but leaves everything subtly distorted. The real danger in relationships isn't the open conflict. It's the quiet comfort that grows between two people who should never be that close. And that's exactly what started happening with Ryan and Lisa. It all began with innocent conversations in the kitchen, then a few movies on the couch until the line between companionship and inappropriate closeness started to fade. And when that line fades, the next step isn't really a decision, it's just the consequence. With the house now ruled by routine and the days drifting by, Ryan and Lisa began to share spaces that never belonged to either of them before. Thomas's absence created gaps just begging to be filled. And like actors reading from a script they didn't know existed, they met in those empty spaces. Dinner became a tradition paired with wine and conversations that grew more personal by the night. Lisa slowly stopped treating Ryan like a stepson and started treating him like a confidant. It was subtle, but anyone who's been there knows the worst betrayals don't erupt in chaos. They're born in the ordinary. It's easy to underestimate the power of a glance. It may seem harmless, but that's where ethics begin to erode. A smile that lingers too long, A touch on the hand that lasts a second more than it should. A comment that mixes humor with suggestion. At first, it's easy to brush it off as imagination, but the body feels what the mind still tries to deny. And Ryan, with his reckless youth and emotional restlessness, began to crave the attention. After all, who doesn't feel special being admired up close? Lisa, on her end, seemed a little too comfortable. Maybe it was boredom, maybe vanity, or maybe a kind of loneliness she couldn't even name. Instead of keeping the safe distance expected from a maternal figure, she nurtured the interactions like someone watering a forbidden plant. It was like building an emotional house of cards one step at a time, hoping the wind wouldn't come. But the wind always comes. And when it does, it doesn't ask for permission. The feeling of intimacy grew in the same proportion as their sense of reason disappeared. They started sharing things only couples typically share: frustrations, secret dreams, buried resentments. At some point, Ryan stopped seeing her as my dad's wife and started seeing her as the woman who understands me. That shift in perception is dangerous. It's like handling exposed wires without gloves. You think you're in control until the shock hits. Then the comparisons began. Ryan admired Lisa's maturity and contrasted it with the shallow girls he knew at college. Lisa, in turn, found herself flattered by Ryan's youth and admiration, things Thomas hadn't shown her in a while. A classic, familiar mistake, confusing emotional hunger with true connection. That's how a lot of irreversible decisions get made, not out of malice but from a lack of self-awareness and self-control. And when emotional hunger meets proximity, the risk becomes inevitable. And in that environment, full of unspoken desires and poorly managed emotions, the space between them disappeared, not overnight, but like sinking slowly into quicksand, only realizing it when your feet no longer touch the ground. And the strangest thing? No one screams when they're enjoying the fall. Ryan and Lisa didn't say, "Let's betray Thomas." They simply stopped saying no. And sometimes, that's all it takes for tragedy to begin. What started with glances and words eventually turned into touch. It happened on a regular evening, the smell of red wine in the air and some forgotten movie playing on TV. Lisa wore a dress far too light for the cold outside. Ryan, still clinging to the idea that maybe it was all innocent, couldn't resist. A compliment at the wrong time, a hand on the knee, and the silence between them shattered like glass. It wasn't love. It was impulse wrapped in the absence of boundaries. And when desire finds fertile ground, it never asks permission. Most people think betrayal is a single act. But in truth, it's a process. Every step toward that line is a choice left unchallenged. Every vague message that went unanswered. Every hug that lasted a little too long. In Ryan and Lisa's case, the body simply confirmed what the mind had already decided weeks before. They gave in like someone jumping off a cliff believing they'd learn how to fly mid-air. And the fall, as always, only feels slow until you hit bottom. In the days that followed, the most dangerous side effect kicked in: self-deception. They told themselves it was a mistake, that they were lonely, that it was temporary. But anyone who's ever lied to themselves knows just how convincing guilt can be when it's disguised as a reason. And to make matters worse, Thomas kept sending cheerful videos, saying how he couldn't wait to come home. The cruel irony was that while he fought to stay alive, his own home had become a battlefield, and he had no idea he was already losing. Lisa started acting like two different people. In front of the neighbors, she was the perfect wife. With Ryan, she was a partner, a lover, a refuge, and the scariest part? She seemed to believe she could be both. Ryan, caught between adrenaline and fear, gave in with the intensity of someone who wasn't mature enough to handle the weight of his choice. He took off his conscience like it was an annoying jacket and lived each moment as if his father would never return. But the clock doesn't stop, and neither does guilt. Their secret meetings became regular, hidden in perfect schedules with rehearsed rituals. They learned how to talk with their eyes, to create coded gestures, to hide their desires under casual movements. It was a dangerous choreography, where even the smallest mistake could bring everything crashing down. But the problem with secret games is that over time, they stop being games and become addictions. And like any addiction, they begin to consume everything around them: peace, sleep, and conscience. And that's when they stopped being accidental accomplices and became partners in a silent pact. A pact that grew like a hidden crack in a house's foundation. On the outside, everything looked fine. But inside, the structure could no longer be trusted. And what people often forget is that no matter how solid a lie may seem, it never survives its first confrontation with the truth. After the third or fourth time, it wasn't a transgression anymore. It was a routine. Ryan woke up with a heavy conscience and went to sleep, craving the next forbidden touch. And that's where most people get it wrong. Betrayal doesn't live only in the act itself. It feeds on the habit. Their relationship turned into a maze with no way out, where guilt mixed with pleasure and regret came with a taste of just one more time. Ryan even tried to walk away, but the absence of Lisa ate him alive. Like any addiction, desire doesn't care if it's right. It just wants to be fed. Lisa was also consumed by that toxic mix. She swore she still loved Thomas, but justified her meetings with Ryan by saying, "These things just happened." And when someone starts blaming chance, it's a clear sign they've already lost control. Her body might still belong to Thomas, but her time, her gaze, her attention, it all orbited around Ryan now. Worst of all, she truly believed she could juggle both worlds without one crashing into the other. That's what I call emotional illusion, a bubble that always pops, sooner or later. It's common in double lives for guilt to wear the mask of logic. Ryan told himself his dad didn't deserve her, that Lisa deserved to be happy, that he was too young to understand all the complexity. These thoughts rise up as a defense mechanism, and they're incredibly dangerous. That's why if you ever catch yourself justifying something morally shaky with lines like "nobody's perfect" or "it's not that simple," stop. Ask yourself deeper questions. Because it's in that very self-deception where most people completely lose their way. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Thomas faced freezing nights and unexpected explosions. He wrote letters that began with, "I miss you both so much," and ended with, "I'll be home soon." The contrast was unimaginable. A real war zone on one side, and a silent moral collapse unfolding in his own home. How many soldiers return expecting open arms and find closed hearts? How many believe they're protecting their country, when in truth, they're losing their family? Thomas's story isn't an exception. It's far more common than people think. And Lisa, even as she tried to keep the act going, started to show signs of wear. Dark circles grew deeper, her mood shifted constantly, and sometimes she found herself crying alone for no reason at all. That's what emotional addiction does. It drains energy, steals peace, and leaves you stuck in a constant state of alert. Ryan noticed it, but instead of pulling back, he tried to comfort her. With kisses, with promises, with more secret meetings. And just like that, they created a destructive cycle where every attempt to fix things was really just another nail in the coffin. When the heart clashes with the conscience, the body pays the price. And by that point in the story, both of them were emotionally drained, but had no idea how to stop. And the cruelest part, they were still hiding everything perfectly. No one suspected a thing. At least, not yet. Because in every story like this, there's always that inevitable moment when the mask starts to slip. And once that happens, there's no turning back. Thomas came home earlier than expected. A canceled military operation and an emergency flight brought him back weeks ahead of schedule. He arrived unannounced, carrying the weight of war on his back and a hopeful spark in his eyes, expecting to find his house untouched. There was that brightness in his gaze, the kind of hope only someone who still believes home is a refuge could carry. But within minutes, something felt off, and it wasn't the bags left by the door. It was the awkward silence, the lack of a warm welcome, the sense that no one was happy to see him, not even his wife. For a man who's survived war, the instinct for danger never fully shuts off. Thomas could feel it, the way Lisa avoided eye contact, how Ryan acted with that weird, forced calmness. Everything pointed to a shift. He tried masking his discomfort with small talk and smiles, but something had already taken root inside him. That's how suspicion starts, in subtle details that only someone who's stared death in the face knows how to spot. And the worst part? The more he tried to reconnect, the more they both seemed to drift away. Instead of coming home to warmth and harmony, Thomas was met with rehearsed lines, busy schedules, and poorly crafted excuses. Dinner, once a joyful ritual, had turned mechanical. The laughter felt fake. Lisa seemed way too tense. Ryan, cold and detached. When something's wrong in a home, you don't need shouting matches. The energy gives it away. Thomas, a man who knew the battlefield like the back of his hand, began mentally mapping every detail. Timing, glances, body language. And the more he watched, the more the pieces fit together. He tried to justify it. Maybe it's just the stress of me being back, he thought. Maybe they're dealing with something and don't want to burden me. But that excuse didn't last long. Because what was missing wasn't just warmth. It was truth. And truth has a smell. It lingers, or its absence suffocates. Thomas didn't want to believe what his gut was screaming. After all, this was his own son, the woman he took in as his second chance. But the more he tried to silence the thought, the louder it rang inside him. During what seemed like a normal conversation in the living room, Thomas noticed something strange. Lisa laughed at a joke Ryan hadn't even finished. It was a laugh that was way too intimate, too synchronized, like two people who shared private secrets. That was it. Not because of the laugh itself, but the ease between them. It felt like he was the outsider, like his presence was disrupting something. From that moment on, he stopped trying to ignore it and started observing with military precision. Anyone trained to detect traps knows, the better hidden they are, the more dangerous they become. Thomas wasn't looking for confrontation anymore. He wanted certainty. And like any man who's been betrayed but still loves, deep down, he was hoping to be wrong. Because the truth hurts, but doubt, that eats you alive. That's when he chose to act with calm. Because sometimes it's in the quiet moments of analysis that the truth kicks down the door. Thomas started collecting clues like someone piecing together an emotional puzzle. He didn't make a scene, didn't ask direct questions. He just watched. And the more he watched, the less it all felt like paranoia. The way Lisa changed clothes when Ryan was around. Doors locked at strange hours. Hidden phones, deleted messages. A detail here, another one there, until the full picture came into focus. The betrayal was no longer a ghost. It was a shadow walking beside him through his own home. The breaking point came when Thomas opened the old family laptop, the one no one used anymore. One click on a saved browser history, a casual login into Lisa's email, and there it was. An exchange of messages between her and Ryan. No codes, no filters, just dates, times, intimate details. The words burned more than any explosion he'd ever faced in war. This wasn't just a marital betrayal. It was blood betrayal. His own son was part of a story that ripped him apart from the inside out. There was no way to pretend anymore. This is the moment when most people lose it. They yell, they confront, they break everything. But not Thomas. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a strategist. He knew a truth this painful needed to be revealed surgically. Because pain teaches, but exposure transforms. He spent days reviewing the messages, backing up the files, organizing the proof. Not because he wanted impulsive revenge, but because he wanted emotional justice. He needed them to feel, clearly, the weight of the choices they had made. It's strange how betrayal, when exposed in cold detail, hits harder than any emotional outburst. Thomas knew that, so he waited for the right moment. It wouldn't happen in a screaming match or a tearful breakdown. It would be planned. He made sure neither of them suspected a thing. He kept smiling. He kept saying, "Good night," because sometimes silence is the loudest scream of all. And every time he said, "I love you," it stabbed him inside. But he was waiting for the perfect time to strike. The hardest part about being betrayed by someone you raised is the identity crisis it causes. Thomas spent nights asking himself, where did I go wrong? But the truth is, sometimes there is no clear mistake. Sometimes people betray you because they choose themselves, even if it costs the heart of someone who truly loved them. Once that realization hit, Thomas didn't feel rage. He felt grief. Grief for a family he thought he had rebuilt. Grief for a son he no longer recognized. Grief for a version of himself that was now gone. And in that silent grief, Thomas found his strength. He didn't just want to reveal the truth. He wanted every detail to land with impact. He wanted every word read aloud to become a permanent memory, and to do that he designed something bigger. Because when you decide to expose a betrayal, it's not enough to show the facts. You have to show what they destroyed. And the best way to do that was in front of everyone. Thomas picked a Saturday night for the reckoning. He invited close friends, relatives, people who had known him since his service days. The excuse was simple: a welcome home dinner. Nothing out of the ordinary. Lisa, cheerful as ever, handled the arrangements like she always did, completely unaware she was setting the stage for her own downfall. Ryan, visibly uncomfortable, tried to decline the invite, but Thomas insisted. He wanted everyone there, because some truths need to be spoken out loud, in front of the people who matter. The evening started light. Laughter, toasts, war stories. Thomas said little, but watched everything. The glances exchanged between Lisa and Ryan, the hidden tension in their words. It all served as contrast for what was coming. When dinner ended, Thomas stood up and said he wanted to share something that changed his life while he was away. Everyone expected a story from the front lines, but what they heard was the beginning of a revelation heavier than any war zone. Calmly, Thomas pulled an envelope from his pocket. Inside were printed copies of the messages exchanged between his wife and his son. Black and white. Real. Undeniable. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just read them, with the cold composure of a man who'd learned how to handle tragedy. Every sentence hit like a blow. People turned pale. The silence was deafening. Lisa froze. Ryan looked down. There was no denying it. The proof was right there. The words left no room for excuses. It was the truth, raw and cruel. Lisa began mumbling, trying to explain the unexplainable, but Thomas cut her off with a calm, firm gesture. "I'm not here for explanations. I'm just here to take back what you stole from me, my dignity." The words dropped like a sentence. Ryan stood up, stunned, and left the house without saying a word. Lisa broke down in tears, but there was no comfort left. Because when truth is revealed in public, it's like shattered glass, impossible to pick up without bleeding. And everyone there felt the weight of that fall. There was no fight, no screaming, just exposure. And that's what hurts most for the ones who betray, being seen for who they really are. Thomas didn't need to do anything else. The reaction from those around him said it all. The looks of disappointment, the whispers among friends, the silent judgment. It was as if the house itself was condemning them. And at that moment, Lisa and Ryan stopped being people and became a lesson in what emotional greed can destroy when it crosses the line of decency. Exposure doesn't give back what was lost, but it reveals who truly deserves to stay in your life. Thomas knew that, and even with a shattered heart, he felt like he had reclaimed a part of himself, the part that refuses to be deceived, the part that refuses to play the victim. But what do you do after the whole truth is out? How do you rebuild anything in the rubble of broken trust? The answer, he would find later, where silence finally gives way to reconstruction. After the dinner, the house went silent. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was mourning. Every corner echoed the words spoken that night. Thomas went days without saying a word to anyone. He just walked through the house like a man searching for traces of a life that no longer existed. The photos on the shelf, the sheets washed by Lisa, the books Ryan used to read, all of it had lost meaning. And when memory becomes a ghost, it's impossible to sleep without dreaming of pain. Lisa left a few days later, without saying goodbye. She left a short note behind, trying to explain the unexplainable. She barely took anything, just her clothes and her silence. Ryan, meanwhile, vanished. Moved to another city. No contact. And even though Thomas told himself he held no resentment, the emptiness was obvious. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconnection. Sometimes it just means moving forward with less weight. But moving on isn't the same as forgetting. At first, Thomas tried keeping himself busy. He cleaned the house obsessively like he wanted to erase every trace of what had happened. Then, he started walking. Long walks, blocks and blocks. A lone veteran carrying a head full of battles. It was during those walks that he found others like him. Quiet men, heavy eyes, invisible scars. He discovered a veterans support center, a simple place full of stories eerily similar to his own. He listened. Then, he started to talk. With time, he went from listener to mentor. He shared his pain like a man offering a map, so others wouldn't get lost on the same road. He spoke not just about war, but about the family battles no one talks about. The betrayal, the emotional rebuilding, the importance of having purpose when everything collapses. He created a project for veterans who had been cheated, abandoned, broken inside. And in the middle of all that shared pain, a new man was born, a man who no longer needed to hide his story. Meanwhile, Ryan tried to start over in another state. He took simple jobs, changed addresses often, but even far away he couldn't outrun the guilt. That betrayal hadn't ended in that house. It followed him like a shadow. Lisa disappeared too. Some said she moved in with relatives. Others said she changed her name. But honestly, their fate no longer mattered. Because some stories aren't about what happens to others. They're about what you do with what others have done to you. And with that awareness, Thomas decided to rebuild his life. Not like before, not patching things up, but creating something entirely new. Because after everything falls apart, you don't rebuild the same house. You build a different one on new ground with stronger foundations. Even without all the bricks, even with visible scars, he understood. There's still life after ruin. And anyone who survives that is never the same again. And now the question remains, how many truths are being ignored inside someone's own home? How many fake smiles are quietly accepted, pretending everything's fine? Maybe that person has never been to war like Thomas. But are they fighting every single day for people who don't even deserve the effort? The cruelest part of betrayal isn't the damage it causes. It's the blindness that comes before it. And those who don't learn to see the signs often end up learning the hard way, through pain. There are only two choices: keep believing in appearances or start paying attention to what's really behind people's actions. One's peace is worth more than any blood tie. And if this story helped open someone's eyes, then the mission is complete. Now it's the audience's turn. Have you ever been through something like this? Were you able to rebuild? Drop it in the comments. Your pain might be the relief someone else is looking for. And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because here, the truth isn't just told, it's unearthed.